Hello, it's Randi Rhodes. Here's a clip from our show, and go to randyrhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.
Mary had a little man.
The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Believe me.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
You got the guy right here. This dude stands for the extermination of the white race. I've already told you that, dude.
Jeffrey, every week we find something to agree
Yes,
on, Jeffrey.
every
it's
week.
your turn to pick a topic.
Every week, okay.
Your turn to pick a topic.
Is America great? How about that?
But Jeff, they're going to keep coming. I mean,
They're not. There's less of them. There are less. There are people that are not here, and there are more of my side. So that's all that matters. When I first came out here, there were 2 dudes on that side.
8 or 10.
That's
awesome.
right.
Well,
that's a 400% increase. Okay?
I mean,
they're staying stagnant. Okay?
So just so I'm clear, by confronting folks, and you do kind of get in their faces when you want to talk to them with your camera, which makes people uncomfortable.
Okay.
You feel that's actually having a damping effect on their effort, right? So fewer of them are coming out. So you feel like your
Yes.
tactics are working.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
I feel like my leftist tactics are slightly working because that's what they do to us. They'll show up at our jobs. They'll show up at our fucking places, and they'll protest. They'll try to get us fired. They'll do all this shit that they claim we're doing. Like when they had the meeting after that thing up in Auburn. We need to worry about the left doxing us. The left is the one doxing us. They're the ones making lists of people that support the NRA and calling them and threatening to take their money away from them.
All right.
That shit is wrong.
So if you feel this strategy is working for you, I can rationalize that.
I'm sorry?
Bro, I'm still down to have a beer with you and sit quietly any day, dude.
They've been here for over a year. I don't see.
Oh my God.
But how long has there been opposition here? 2 months.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying. If I would have known they were out here wasting their lives, having retirement parties for Tom McClintock, I would have been here last year. Did you see the shit they had going on out here, dude? They had full-blown, blown up inflatable shit, tables, all sorts of stuff going on. This is not their area. This is Placer County. This is Roseville. This isn't San Francisco. This is Placer County. It's Roseville.
So there's a lot of that going on. There are a lot of people who are getting right up in people's faces now, and they think that they have the right to harass people. They think they have the right to, call people names, to get up in people's faces, to scream at them, to accuse them of doing illegal things. I mean, and all in the name of saving the white race. It is a very sick situation. We have lists in the homework section today of all the things you cannot do in this country while black. Some of them are like breathing. Some of them are being lawfully armed. Some of them are being unarmed. Some of them are laying down. Some of them are standing up. Some of them are, putting your hands up because that's a sudden movement. Some of them are not putting your hands up because they told you to put your hands up and now you're resisting arrest. So it's gotten to a point where it's so prevalent now. It's everywhere now. It's sad now. And I've heard from too many of our listeners who are saying, you know what, Randi, it's so depressing that we're withdrawing. We're literally withdrawing. We don't know where we're safe. We don't know how to function. It's just too much. It's traumatic. It's like we all have post-traumatic stress disorder. And so immediately I thought, the best person to talk to about this is somebody who's an activist in this area, somebody who's an educator in this area, somebody who writes books about this area, somebody who understands, race and that it's really just a construct. There really is no such thing. But so I invited Tim Wise, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad.
Hey, how are you?
Oh, man. So I'm just going to be honest with you. There are so many nasty folks out there. I mean, just really heinous people who harass me and other people because they think that somehow they're losing their white privilege and they don't even understand that they ever had it.
Right. Yeah, it's sort of the ultimate irony. They spend all these years denying that it's even a thing.
Right.
And the minute that their position begins to feel, not even threatened, just challenged by pluralism, just challenged by any level of diversity or the mere presence of people of color in their neighborhood, at their Starbucks,
Yeah.
in their dorm, Yale, at the park in Oakland, which used to be a black city. All of a sudden, these white folks, wrapped up not only in our privilege, but our fragility. We are the most fragile snowflakes on the planet. Apparently have the need to call police, engage in this, just over-the-top, hateful, bigoted behavior that we've seen time after time. And, let's be real clear. This isn't new, and I think the big mistake is to think that it is. It's certainly true that some of these folks have been emboldened by the current political moment, but, white folks calling police on black people, for instance, was going on a long time before the more recent incidents. I talked about this yesterday, actually, on my podcast. There was a 6-year-old girl in a Georgia elementary school classroom who had the cops called on her a few years back in 2012 for having a temper tantrum in class. A black teenager who was trying to buy a belt at Barney's, but because it was an expensive belt, the assumption was he must have stolen the money that he used to buy it, so they called the cops on him. And keep in mind, George Zimmerman, before he took out after Trayvon, called the cops first. And the sad fact is, if the police had come and confronted Trayvon Martin, there's no guarantee it wouldn't have ended up exactly the same way.
Right.
So this kind of has been going on a really long time, and we're just maybe now, for some of us, some white folks in particular, coming to see it.
Well, we've talked before, and that's because when Obama became president, I started. I'm very lucky. The African American community, or just people in general, trust me with their personal stories, and they've been sharing their stories with me for years and years. And so when Obama became president, a lot of black women were calling me, and they were terrified. They understood that there was going to be white lash. They got it. They got it instantly. While they were thrilled to see, a dream fulfilled, they were also terrified. And of course, they had reason to be, because this is when it seems like the Tea Party people just became prevalent. They were everywhere, and they were, showing signs of Barack Obama with a bone through his nose, and Donald Trump became a birther, and this crazy thing about affirmative action and how it was, discriminating against white people, for God's sake. And that seems to be the thing that's getting in their craw. That they're sending me videos of Jared Taylor now, the American Renaissance Nazi guy. And, they think that Jared Taylor makes so much sense.
Yeah. Well, Jared Taylor is one of the leading sort of intellectual lights within the white supremacist movement, and he's far more dangerous than the bozos that were out in the field in Charlottesville at the University of Virginia. Jared is much more dangerous than those guys, because he's a lot more careful about playing his hand, and he tries to speak in these very high-minded tones. I wish that the media would do as much of a job exposing people like that as they do sort of the overt Nazis who can't help themselves and, throw up Sieg Heil salutes and do things like that, because they're much easier, I think, to see coming. People like Jared, much more dangerous, because he wraps his racism in a patina of respectability.
He's the preppiest. He's literally the preppiest racist I've ever seen in my life. I mean, this guy.
He speaks in this affected, sort of old English kind of accent. This sort of he's trying to do William Buckley. He's not doing it as well as Buckley did it.
That's exactly
sort of fake, English Connecticut accent or whatever. But it's that kind of thing. And so I do think we need to. And you mentioned the backlash piece. Carol Anderson's book, White Rage, she's a professor at Emory University in Atlanta. I highly recommend the book. And she talks about how in every era of black progress in this country's history, there has been this concomitant reaction of white rage because, as the saying goes, and I don't know who originated it, so I apologize, but when you're used to privilege, equality, or even just pluralism feels like oppression, right? So if I'm used to 90% of the good stuff, if I'm used to, let's say, 90% of the government contracts, which is historically what white male companies have received, if you tell me that now I might only get 75% because of equity initiatives, that feels like oppression, right? If I've been, 85% of the tenured faculty, God forbid I might only be 77%. If I've had 15 times the wealth of black families, God forbid it slips to only 10 times as much or 12 times as much, right? There's this, again, it's fragility, as Robin DiAngelo calls it. It's this inability of the dominant group to adapt and to adjust It's an incredibly unhealthy position, and it really points out the irony of privilege, right? The irony is privilege tastes really good until it seems threatened, and then you don't have the coping skills to deal with life the way that marginalized people do. Not to romanticize marginality, it's just that when people have been crapped on their whole lives, they learn to adapt, and people that haven't had to do that are incredibly weak, incredibly thin-skinned, incredibly fragile, so they have to either turn to opiates or they have to turn to a political opioid like Donald Trump to solve all their problems.
Yeah.
And that's why we're in the position that we're in right now.
It is so true. I mean, people like to, one of the big topics that they bring up to me, these crazy people, I mean, and they will send you 40, 50, 60 emails. They will call the show. I mean, there's one calling right now, calls every single day, all day. Okay. There's a whole bunch of them out there, and they're all coming from Reddit and 4chan, and, they'll put out these, no, call her, you know what I mean? And put.
Yeah, because these members of the mass have jobs.
I was just going to, they're what? Oh, because they don't have jobs. Oh, well, one guy says he won $600,000 playing video poker. That's another aspect of it is these gamers, okay? They're in these gaming places, and a lot of white supremacy is happening in these game rooms. It's just amazing where they're getting this stuff from. But when you bring up, now for them, the thing is affirmative action, okay? That's the new slight. And when you bring up to them that there has always been, especially in the Ivy League, affirmative action for white people. These are the legacies where, George Bush is a C student, but he can get into Yale because daddy went to Yale and daddy is a donor. That is a legacy. That is, affirmative action for white people.
Look, you take all the black and Latinx folks combined, so black and brown folks at the top colleges and universities in this country combined, they represent about 14% of all the students. So if white folks think that we're being bumped from Yale, that's the thing they always say. I would have gotten into Yale if I had just been black, overlooking the fact that if they had been black, they wouldn't have been black just on the day they applied to Yale. They would have been black from the first day of their life, which means they would have been 3 times as likely to grow up poor, twice as likely to grow up in a house where the parents were unemployed. They would have been twice as likely to die in infancy. So forget Yale, you didn't even go into first grade, right? Their life would have been entirely different. But they only want to talk about the so-called preference that takes place at the point of admission rather than the K-12 education system, at which point we as white folks are 1/10 as likely to have attended a concentrated poverty school, twice as likely to have had the most experienced teachers, 3 times as likely to have had AP and honors course access. They start the yardstick at a very late point in the race.
I agree with you, and I've tried really hard to show people, that, being black in America, especially if you come from a community where there's rental properties rather than home ownership, makes your schools so terrible. Because there's no tax base to pay these and teachers in general are treated like slime in this society, and so these kids that get the advantage of going to a private school or get the advantage of going, I mean. And there is no such thing as affirmative action in the way that they associate it. You don't.
Of course not.
I mean, if I hear one more time, Tim, and this is why I called you, if I hear one more time that people get extra points on their SATs for being black, I'm going to tear my hair out of my head.
All right. Facts don't matter to Nazis and racists and white supremacists. They don't know what they're talking about. They lie all the time about these programs. They have no idea what they're talking about, nor do they know how the programs work, if they work at all. I mean, the reality is there are only about 100 and maybe 25 colleges in the United States that even do any kind of significant, what we might call affirmative action, where they're actually having to really, make a deliberate effort, because most colleges, pretty much anybody who applies gets in. Most colleges and universities are not ultra selective. There's only about 125 that are. And like I said, even at those schools, black and brown folks combined are about 13 or 14% of the students. And so if you're white and you can't get in, it's not because a person of color took your slot. It is because, as you pointed out, probably a richer white person, better connected, took your spot. And the same thing is true with jobs. If black and brown folks are taking all the jobs, then I need Nazis to explain to me how it is that white people are still half as likely to be out of work. Where are these jobs? Are they in Second Life? Are they on Minecraft? Are they in video game world? They're not in the real labor market. And yet again, facts are sticky things, which Nazis hope and white supremacists hope the general public is too stupid to actually look up for themselves. And so it's our job to make clear that these folks not only are not a master race, they're not even very good with Google. And that's been around for a while.
I know. Why can't you do a Google search? I don't understand it. So just for the record, affirmative action doesn't really exist. What it is it's one factor of admission. It's constitutional, and it's just one factor of admission that can be considered. Quotas are illegal in this country. They don't exist. And this Abigail Fisher case at UT, would you like to tell people who actually got Abigail Fisher's spot at UT?
Well, the year that she applied, and this has been true every year that one of these white folks has sued, you come to find out that the same year that they didn't get in, the same year that these white victims ostensibly were rejected, there were two things that never get mentioned. Number one, the same year, there were more black and Latino folks who were also rejected the same year, who had higher scores than Abigail Fisher, who had higher scores than Jenny Graff, which was the case at the University of Michigan. So there were more black and brown folks who were next in line ahead of Abby Fisher. She wouldn't have been next in any event. And the same year, there were far more white students than her who did get in, who were accepted, even though they had lower scores and grades than Abby Fisher. Now, why didn't Abigail Fisher complain about these less qualified white people getting in ahead of her? Because there were several. I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but I think it was like maybe 60 or so. Same thing was true with Jenny Graff. There were several dozen white folks less qualified using her interpretation of qualifications, grades and test scores. More white folks who got in who were less qualified, and there were more black and brown folks who didn't get in who were more qualified than she was, and she didn't say anything. So these victims are not victims. And, of course, the irony is these are the same people that tell black and brown folks, stop being victims. Stop wallowing in victimhood. But these are the most perfect, precious little victims on the planet. Like I said, they call other people snowflakes because they are engaged in such intense psychological projection that they don't even understand how incredibly snowflake-like all of their complaints are.
And what's interesting about these cases is they all seem to come from one giant slime vat called the Project on Fair Representation, which is the group that was behind the Voting Rights Act, saying racism was over and we didn't need the Voting Rights Act anymore. And then, of course, we saw voter suppression go through the roof, and Pennsylvania was just told to redraw their maps. And the second they did, oh, lo and behold, Tim, we won. Yeah. I mean, listen, I got to tell you that, this country has a very polarized 30%, I will say. It looks to me like there will always be just around 33% of Americans who somehow feel that they are being disadvantaged as more and more black and brown people make it into the middle class. And, I just want to let you know, black and brown is a characteristic that comes from, the adaptation of where your ancestors came from. It isn't, it doesn't signify any other thing. There is no connection to black or brown or Jewish or Asian IQ. This is another one of their crazy ideas. Now they're literally advocating for Asians all of a sudden. Like, this is their new thing.
Yeah, it's all a scam. I mean, it's Ed Bloom, who was one of the people that was behind Abby Fisher and has been behind all of these efforts. And what they're doing is trying to make Asians the new so-called victims of affirmative action, so that we don't actually notice that it's really on behalf of white supremacy that they're making these arguments. The research has been done on this, and it's found that if you were to get rid of affirmative action programs at places like Harvard, who's being sued right now, but it looks like they're going to have this lawsuit go through to try to challenge Harvard's programs because it's supposedly, according to the far right, hurting Asian Americans. If you got rid of affirmative action entirely at Harvard, it would increase the representation of Asian American students by about 1.5% is all, because there's just not a lot of wiggle room to add a whole lot of people, because there just aren't that many black and brown folks who are getting any kind of quote unquote bump from what we might call affirmative action. The people who would benefit most would be white people. But they don't want to say that because then it exposes their actual motivations, which are not about helping Asian folks. These are the same people that want to tell Asian folks to, stop speaking with an accent or go back to their country or whatever. They don't care about that. But they
it's interesting because I looked at the Harvard situation. I actually looked at it, and Asian Americans are overrepresented as a percentage of the population at Harvard, and so this is one of the things they say. Well, that's because Asians are smarter.
Yeah, but they don't really. But then when you ask, I debated Jared Taylor many years ago and asked him that question because he kept saying, I'm not a white supremacist because I think Asians have higher IQ.
Right, right. That's because Jared was raised in Japan. He didn't come to the United States till he was 16 years old.
Right. Oh, I know. But when he says that, if in fact you think that Asian folks are so much more intelligent, then you should be advocating massive immigration of Asian people to the United States to improve the quality of our country. Why don't you do that? Oh, because you're a white supremacist. That's why. You don't actually want more Asians in your college. He doesn't want more Asians in his neighborhood, no matter how smart they are. He's on record as saying he wishes all his neighbors were white and rich. He said that in the debate that he had with me. So he doesn't want Asian folks around regardless of their IQ. He is, however, like all white supremacists, willing to play the game and act as if they're the best friends of Asian Americans so as not to expose their actual white supremacist, white nationalist, white separatist agenda. But it's all a ruse. It's all a game.
It is a game, and it's an interesting game. I just needed somebody to help me get the facts out there about, the fact that there is no affirmative action, okay? It is just, diversity is a quality in our schools that we value. So you can get like a percentage point for adding diversity just if you've had an interesting experience in your life.
Well, and look, there is affirmative action, but let's understand what it is.
Yeah.
What we're saying is that if people who have started out 3 laps behind in a 5-lap race have narrowed the gap and performed in spite of the obstacles that they have faced, that we ought to give them an opportunity to prove themselves because they've already proved themselves in a competition that was rigged. I mean, if I start out 3 laps behind and at the end of the high school race, so to speak, I'm only a lap behind. Maybe I didn't get the exact same SAT score as you, but if I started out with more barriers and I overcame them, that's called merit. That's called qualification. If I start out behind and I narrow the gap, I'm a faster runner, right, in terms of that metaphor. And the same is true academically. If I start out without your connections and I happen to have an impressive resume in spite of that, then maybe I'm actually more qualified for the job than the person who had the connections. It's not about replacing merit with race-based preferences. It's about realizing that in a racially unequal society, achieving against the odds is merit.
It's something to be applauded. It's like, wow, that was pretty amazing. I don't understand why people continue to say that if we did away with with affirmative action, of course you wouldn't see black admissions, and that's a plus. I don't get it. I don't even understand why that's a thing. And affirmative action, like I said, is not. There is no such thing as getting extra points on your SAT. That is not happening.
No.
8 states completely ban any affirmative action at this point. Like you said, there are only 125 colleges that are elite colleges, and all they do is at the point of admission consider your whole life story so that they can have an interesting graduating class, and that's pretty much it.
And by the way, most of the admissions officers at those colleges also try to do the same thing. Now, they don't always succeed, and I wish they would do it better, but they try to also consider the same thing for working-class white folks. Interestingly, if you look at an Ivy League school like Harvard or Yale, and you look at a kid from California applying and a kid from Utah applying, and they have the same SAT score, right? So they're equally qualified according to the standards that conservatives love to talk about. The Utah applicant, who is overwhelmingly likely to be white just based on the demographic of that state, the applicant from Utah has a 45 times greater likelihood of getting into that Ivy League school than the equally qualified kid from California. Now, is that unfair? I would argue no. I would argue that's because, you know what, if I'm the Harvard admissions team, I'm like, hey, I want to have some people from Utah. I want to have some people from Wyoming. I want to have people, and there's nothing wrong with that. Technically, it's a preference. technically it means their odds are better, but the reason their odds are better is that there's a smaller pool of people from that place applying, and California has a lot of applicants because it's a really big-ass state, right? It's like, if you live in Cambridge or you grow up in Boston and you're a good student, you're probably going to apply to Harvard. So you know what? The odds of people from Boston getting into Harvard are probably lower than the odds of somebody from Montana who is white as snow. But that's not unfair. It's just like understanding basic statistical probability, which, again, Nazis cannot do math. This is the problem. They cannot do math. They are not a master race. Clearly, they don't have the higher IQ. There's no question about that because they can't do basic statistical.
I love you. I do. The love is just endless for you. Thank you for saying yes to me today. I really needed to talk to you. And like I said, Tim Wise has a podcast. It's called Speak Out with Tim Wise. It's on Patreon. So go to patreon.com/Speak Out with Tim Wise. The new book is White Lies Matter, Race, Crime, and the Politics of Fear. I suggest you get 10 copies and give it to all your Nazi friends. Thank you, Tim.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you. I love you. Okay, that's what facts sound like. That's what the real world feels like. I hope I didn't, upset your little snowflake day too much. I hope I didn't put you off of your gaming. Freaks. Losers. You are so delicate. You really are. So I had to find a man to tell it to you because you just don't want to hear it from me. Some girl. All right. I'm so glad I got that out of my system. I feel so much better. Go to RandiRhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.